Hi, everyone. I'm glad you're here because today's episode is a doozy. Today, I have 3 stories that nearly shattered everyone involved as they tried to rationalize what happened to them. Just wait until you hear what you're about to hear. So, if you're enjoying the channel, don't be invisible. Let us know you're out there and smash that subscribe button so we can always be together. Thanks. Now, let's get into the stories. I've lived on a farm my whole life. Death on a farm is inevitable. So is life. Occasionally, though, you'll have unexplained deaths. This is a story I tell all the time to warn others, and every bit of it is true. I raise sheep in Montana. My wife and I bought a piece of land with lots of room to grow our family and our business. There was a nice-sized house and a barn already on it. We built fencing in order to keep predators out. Once we started buying animals at the local farm swaps, we just couldn't seem to stop. It started with sheep, in pairs, different breeds, and that just meant more fencing. And then we got chickens. We built a small chicken coop that connected to the barn. The chickens could roam the yard all day, but they always seemed to put themselves to bed at night. All we had to do was go out and close up the little door when it got dark. Being that we seemed to spend a lot of our weekend mornings at the farm swaps, we got to know a lot of our neighbors. Most of them raised animals too, and they would tell birth stories, funny stories, and warn each other when predators seemed to be out and about. We beefed up our security by purchasing a dog that we hoped would help protect our livestock as it grew up. He was a Great Pyrenees, and if you know anything about them, it's that they are huge. We named him Tuck. My wife and I spoiled Tuck rotten, and he went everywhere with us. He loved riding in the truck, and then when he got big enough, he would jump up in the truck bed, hoping we would take him for a ride. I started leaving the tailgate down because it's a lifted truck and pretty high up. One summer, it got so unseasonably hot that our chickens started falling over from too much heat. They were passing out. We even lost one to dehydration. We bought them a fan and some misters, but like I said, they roamed most of the time. It was a Monday when we lost the first one. By Thursday, we were down to just 10 from our original 15. Some of them didn't come home at night, and we feared they had died from the heat somewhere. Friday, we woke up and discovered that we'd forgotten to close the hatch to the chicken coop. A few were roaming around in the yard already. We let Tuck out as we went to do morning chores, and he ran to the coop and began frantically barking. When we went to see what was going on, and as we got closer, we saw feathers and bits of something all around the little building. Tuck started whining and ran away. When we got there and looked in, we could see that there was a chicken torn to shreds beside the coop door. It was a horrible sight. What was left of the bird was mangled. My wife had never seen anything like it. Unfortunately, I had. My guess was that a coyote or a wolf had gotten its head in the door, and this poor girl was probably the unlucky one close enough to the opening to be grabbed. That's what we thought until we made a discovery the following night. It was about 10:30 and Tuck started pacing by the glass sliding door. He was whining, and then he began howling, so I grabbed the shotgun and he and I went out into the night. My wife followed us with a flashlight. The chicken coop is a good 100 yards from the back of the house. Tuck took off like a shot towards it, and he wouldn't listen when I called him back. That's unusual. We heard him growling, and it sounded like he was fighting with something. By the time we got to the coop, Tuck had chased off whatever the predator was. He sniffed around some and headed around the corner to the barn. And then one of the sheep started screaming. We followed Tuck. He must have triggered the motion lights, and that's when we saw it. It was gray, and it stood nearly 7 feet tall on 2 legs. Its face was something like a wolf with a long nose, and its chest was broad and rippled with muscles. Also, it was standing upright. The hair on its head ran down its back like a mane, standing up as it snarled at us. The whole barn reeked of wet dog, overpowering the smell of the livestock. I raised my shotgun at it, and that's when Tuck launched at it. I couldn't stop him. That thing tossed our 146-pound dog like he weighed nothing, and then it let out this guttural growl. I took a shot, but I was shaking so badly I missed. The thing jumped up into the livestock pens and burst through the door on the other side of the barn. Tuck ran out the door, trying to head it off. Admittedly, we didn't want to follow. We were too scared. I got outside just in time to see the back end of Tuck jumping into the truck bed. The wolf-like thing was nowhere to be found, so I went over to check on Tuck. I heard whining, and when I tried to look over the tailgate, Tuck grabbed my pant legs by his teeth. He was hiding underneath the truck. That's when the creature jumped out of the back of the truck and landed at least 10 feet away, already running. I pulled the trigger again, shooting in its direction, but it was running so fast, both on 4 legs and 2. I think I might have hit it this time, but the thing was enormous, and if I did, it didn't hurt it enough to slow it down. Lucky for us, that was the last time we encountered that thing, but you can be sure that we alerted the neighbors, and now we are all looking for it. At the risk of everybody knowing who I am when they hear this story, I'm going to go ahead and tell it publicly because I think it's worth sharing with a wider audience than just my friends and family. In 2020, following my divorce, I bought a tiny house in the small town of Bradley, South Dakota. It wasn't much, just a 1-bedroom, 1-bathroom cottage-type home across the alley from an old church, one that had long since quit holding service and started falling apart. Bradley's a very small town with a Mayberry-type feel. Everybody knows everybody. The kids and dogs run the streets freely without anybody bothering them too much. There's even an old woman a couple of blocks over with a pet peacock that runs wild with the kids. When you envision a small, weird little town in the middle of nowhere, it's Bradley, South Dakota. So I wasn't expecting much trouble the day I moved in. In fact, the first few weeks I was there were pretty boring. Nothing at all happened. I spent the time fixing up the house just like I like it, literally, in some cases, sitting and watching the paint dry. It was my 10th night in the house when I first saw the little girl. I was watching TV in the living room and I heard something shuffling around in the hallway. I couldn't imagine what it might be, and I thought that maybe one of those free-range kids or dogs had made its way in through my back door. So I got up to check it out. She didn't look like she was more than 3 or 4 years old, and she was filthy, covered in dirt from head to toe, and her hair was matted and twisted up in clumps. The only clean thing on her were 2 streams down her face where the tears had washed the dirt away. She startled me when I first saw her, and then I got concerned. I hadn't seen that kid before, and whoever she wasn't being cared for properly. At least, if her appearance was any indication. I asked her, "Honey, what's your name?" But she didn't respond. She just kept staring at me blankly, almost fearfully, like she couldn't tell if I was a good person or a bad one. I tried talking to her again and asked, "Are you hurt?" But she wouldn't tell me. I went back to the living room to get my phone, and when I came back, she was gone. I called the local sheriff and made a report, hoping he'd be able to tell me something, or maybe even come out and find the girl. Strangely, he didn't seem at all that surprised by what I was telling him, and he just told me not to worry about it. I went to bed very disturbed, thinking about how strange his reaction was. And then from that point on, the same thing happened 3 or 4 times a week. I even tried taking a photo of her with my phone one night, but she ran away the second she saw me pointing it at her. It was like she knew what I was trying to do and didn't want to be identified. Finally, I started asking other neighbors about the little girl and if they knew anything. Most of them acted like I was absolutely crazy. A few of them, though, seemed to know who I was talking about, but acted very much like the sheriff, telling me not to worry, and that they were sure she was just fine. I decided the only way to make it stop was to buy a new lock for the back door. I had long been locking the door, but the house had been there, and they had the same key for who knows how long. A new lock, I thought. might take care of the kid being able to run in and out, especially if she somehow had a copy of the keys or knew how to open that lock. The new lock seemed to work. I didn't see her for about 2 weeks. And then one night I was startled awake, wide awake, by something cold touching my face. When my eyes opened, the little girl was standing there by my bed and jumped backwards, every bit as frightened as I was when my eyes opened. She took off running out the door quicker than I could get out of bed, and this time I was determined to get an answer about who she was. I wasn't going to continue living this way. I drove down to the sheriff's station myself and asked to speak to him in person. When I told him who I was and that I needed an answer about this kid, he looked reluctant to tell me anything. And then finally, I guess, he decided there was no point in covering it up anymore. He admitted he didn't know her name, who she was, or who she belonged to, but that he had been getting calls about her for years. Now that didn't make any sense to me because she wasn't old enough to have been causing trouble for years. I imagined she was only just finally old enough to turn the doorknob by herself, so I told him I didn't believe a word of what he was saying. If she's been around for years, she's a damn ghost, I said. And that's when he raised his eyebrows at me, and I knew exactly that that is what he was trying to imply. It took a while, but I did finally figure her name out. I visited every library in the Tri-County area, sifting through old newspapers, until I finally came across an article from 1910. A little girl who lived right on the same property I now live on had apparently died of scarlet fever and had been buried in the churchyard behind the house. For days after her death, her mother would sit outside saying she could hear the girl crying. At first, everyone said it was the crazy hallucinations of a grieving mother. Finally, though, the mother insisted that they dig her baby back up to check. Amazingly, they obliged, thinking that one final look at her daughter's body might help her to make peace with the loss. When they did dig the girl up, though, they found her flipped over on her stomach, her hands twisted up in the air, and her poor little fingernails clawed right off into the wooden casket. Apparently, she'd been buried alive and had come back awake sometime after. The wailing that her mother had heard was really her. She came back around one more time after I learned who she was. I called her by her name, Rachel, and I told her that I was so sorry that she woke up scared and alone, and that if she had let go of this place, she could pass on and be with her mommy and daddy in the world that comes after this one. She wiped the tears from her eyes, smiled at me, and skipped away. I haven't seen her since. I've got to tell you this story that happened to me. It's all true. All of the stories. I know because I've seen that creature that people talk about on your channel. I can hardly believe it. I never thought I would be telling you something about one. Anyway, since my boyfriend Alex died, I just up and sold my house. I couldn't stand to live there anymore, so I bought a used little camper trailer, and I traded my car for a pickup to haul it. I've been traveling around since, and I've seen a lot of stuff, but nothing like what I saw on the way to Memphis, Tennessee. I wanted to go to Graceland because Alex always wanted to go there, and we never did. Stuff always got in the way, money or whatever. I decided to camp at Meeman Shelby Forest State Park. The guy at the visitor center looked like Paul Bunyan or something. A big beard, hat, flannel shirt, the whole deal. Since it was November, the park was pretty empty. It wasn't that cold, but people might have been getting ready for Thanksgiving. I don't know. Paul Bunyan took forever putting something in his computer, and then he said, "You know, I just want to tell you that apparently there have been a lot of dogman sightings around. At least, that's what people are calling it, just so you know." I thought for sure he was messing with me, so I didn't say anything. I just wanted my campsite assignment. I was tired from driving all day. "If you're scared, I can get you a cabin. It's probably safer," he said. "I don't know anything about a dogman," I told him. "People say it's only in Michigan, but I don't believe that," he said. "They also say you only see it in years ending in 7, but I don't believe that either." I was getting sick of it at this point, and I said, "Well, what do you believe?" "Me? I think a dog man's prowling around the area here. I think it's hungry, maybe." "How do you know?" I asked him. "I heard it howl. It doesn't sound like a wolf or a coyote. It sounds different," he said. I don't know what he meant by that, but I decided not to ask. And then he said, "Are you sure you want to be out here by yourself? There's nobody camping today. They're just in the cabins. I do have a cabin you can have." Well, my money was pretty strict, and I knew I didn't have enough for a cabin, so I told him no, just let me have the campsite. He shrugs and said, "Suit yourself." Then he circles my site on a paper map and hands it to me. I drove over to the site and put the blocks under the trailer. It's a teardrop, so I didn't have much other setting up to do. Since it was cold, I just heated up some soup in the microwave and I sat at the table to eat. I didn't hear anything except the usual forest sounds: bugs, birds, squirrels. I was tired, so I got into my little trailer bed early and I fell asleep pretty quickly. I didn't hear anything all night. In the morning, it was so cold, so I stayed inside for a bit, making some pancakes from one of those shake and pour mixes. I drank some coffee and I read my Memphis tour guide. I decided to hike around the park before leaving, but when I got out of the trailer, something told me to check my truck. I walked over to look at it, and one of the tires, the one on the side of the woods, not the side of the road, was completely flat. I got down to look closer and I saw this ragged part, as if something had ripped it or chewed on the tire. Now that was impossible though, because nothing could have jaws powerful enough to chew a tire, except a dinosaur maybe, something huge anyway. But there it was. Whatever it was had teeth strong enough to puncture a tire. The hole wasn't that big, but like I said, the part around it looked chewed, frayed. I wasn't going anywhere until I got that fixed, but it was still pretty early, so I decided to go on the hike first. Maybe I would somehow figure out an answer while I was out there. While I was walking, I saw a few tracks that could have been from a dog, but I couldn't be sure. They were too big though, I thought, like as big as my shoe. And no dog is that big. I decided to hike to the park office to see if Paul Bunyan was there. He was, so I told him I needed the name of a car repair shop. I told him something chewed a hole in my tire. He acted as if that was totally normal and gave me a phone number. He didn't react in any other way. Weird dude. So I called the number and I just told the guy who answered that I needed a tire fixed. He said he could send a tow over. When I got off the phone, Paul Bunyan was staring at me. His actual name was Jeb, according to his name tag. "Dogman," he said. "Bit your tire." "No way," I told him. He shrugged. Finally, the tow came and towed my truck. I rode along with them to the shop in the front seat, in total silence, mind you. But when the guy was done fixing the tire, he said, "What happened to the tire?" I told him the guy at the park thinks it's a dog man. He says, "Put out some dog treats tonight and see if he eats them." Apparently, this whole town is nuts. "I don't have any treats," I told him. He gives me a box of dog treats from behind the counter and says, "Call and tell me what happens." I drove back to the campsite and I left the dog treats a few feet from the camper. It was pretty late, so I just went to bed. In the morning, I looked outside and the treats were gone, box and all. It was still a little dark, but I went outside. I checked the tires first. They were fine. And then when I stood up and looked around, I was sure I could see something staring at me from the edge of the woods. It was bigger than a man, maybe 8 or 9 feet, and sure enough, a face like a dog or a wolf, whose tracks must have been from that thing because the feet were huge. It then snarled and bared its teeth at me, and those teeth made me think of a dinosaur's teeth. Yes, those teeth could have done that to the tire. I definitely did not want to make that thing mad, so I slowly packed up and hooked up the trailer and got out of there. I didn't stop at the visitor center, although I thought about that Paul Bunyan guy the whole way out of there. I guess the locals here really do know what's up. I should have known better than to doubt them.